And now, just a sec. Okay. Great, we're ready. Awesome, so thank you guys. Well, as I said, we're going to discuss the speaking section tonight. And well, in order to do so, let me please share my screen and of course, access our presentation on that topic, okay? Great, here we are. Awesome. Okay, let's go. So well, let us, as I say, discuss some of the general aspects of the speaking section to have them very clear in our minds before we move on to the fourth task that is going to be our specific topic for tonight's class, okay? Well, let us talk about this very quickly. So you know that the speaking section is the shortest part of the TOEFL exam. We have discussed this in our introductory class, right? You remember when we said that in the speaking, or excuse me, the TOEFL exam overall, you get 4 different sections, right? First of all, the reading section, then the listening one, then you have the 10 minutes break. That is, of course, the time when you go and drink water, etc. And then comes the speaking section that compared to the other tasks or sections in the exam is not only the shortest one, but it's very short itself when you think about it and reflect, because it merely lasts for 20 minutes. And when you take all the other sections of the exam and you compare, as I say, you make a balance, the rest of them last for 60 minutes, 1 hour and a half sometimes. So, well, as I say, the speaking section is going to be very fast, okay? It's going to be almost a flash. You're going to feel it that way, trust me. So the thing here is that you are going to have a chance, in this case, to have your ability and proficiency at your speaking capacities well measured and understood by 4 different questions you will have to respond in the speaking section, okay? So we know that, that the speaking section, now focusing a little bit more on our topic, the speaking section is composed of 4 different questions you will have to respond, okay? That is something very much general you need to know, that in the speaking section, as I say, which lasts for 20 minutes, you will have to respond merely 4 questions, okay? And now, although we have 4 questions, we merely have 2 types of questions in the speaking section. And well, the first type of question is called independent question. That is just part of the first task or question of the speaking section. And by the way, when I say task, please don't get confused, because the only thing that I mean by task is question, okay? But in the terms or the terminology that ETS utilizes for the exam, instead of calling them questions, they call them tasks, okay? So whenever I say task, I'm just referring to a question. So as I say, out of the 4 questions or tasks you get in the exam, the first one is going to be an independent question, in the sense that you're going to be responding to personal information, right? And questions 2, 3, and 4 are all of them integrated questions. They are part of the second type of question that, as I say, it's called integrated speaking tasks, okay? And as I say, tonight, we're going to be focusing our attention into one of these integrated questions. Actually, the 4th one. That is going to be our concentration tonight. That is going to be the concentration of our classes, okay? So, well, you know that, and this is something that is very, of course, important for you to know, we are going to be, or during the entire exam, actually, as we have said in our introductory classes too, you have the chance to take notes, all right? That's a very much common question, actually. People say, can I take notes during the exam? And the response is yes, certainly you can take notes, because as we have said in the introductory class too, when you take the TOEFL IBT edition, you have to go to a test center, right? And they provide you with everything you need, with papers, with pencils, with erasers if necessary. So they give you the material you need in order to take notes, all right? So everything you need, they are going to provide you with. And well, so the idea is that you are able to take your notes, all right? So let us now plunge into our specific topic tonight. That, as I say, is not the speaking section in the first, second, or third question, but in the 4th question tonight. And the other ones, of course, you know that we have seen them before and that we're going to continue seeing and reviewing them in the future, okay? But for tonight's class, let us focus our attention in the question number 4. You're going to have to respond. that is, in my opinion, the easiest one, all right? Don't let yourself to be misled, because maybe you say, well, it's the fourth question, probably it's going to be the most difficult one, but it's not the case. As I say, personally, I consider this question number 4 of the speaking section to be the most the easiest one, or the most approachable and simple one, okay? So get it that way. So let us discuss it, okay? As I say, the question number 4 in the speaking section is part of that group of questions that are called integrated questions, all right? That's its name. As you can see, that's the title. So in this, and by the way, this is always going to be, of course, the last question, because it's 1, 2, 3, and 4, right? So the fourth one is the final question. And once you respond to this question number 4, the speaking section finalizes, and then you move on to the writing section, as we discussed in the introductory class. All right, so let us discuss what you have to do and what you're going to find in this fourth question. So in the final task of the TOEFL speaking test, you will be required to hear a lecture and then give a short speech summarizing the main ideas of the lecture and the examples that are mentioned. Let us remember that a lecture is simply a class, right? It's a class that is recorded. And normally these classes are the ones that are held in universities. That is to say, you're going to listen, for example, to an architecture professor talking about, well, architecture. For example, they could be discussing Gothical, I don't know, or Gothic buildings and, well, principles of the 18th century, whatever. Or on the other hand, they could be discussing, let's say, philosophy and talking about the Renaissance or the Enlightening periods when, well, the rationalists and all the skeptics came about, discussing new philosophical trends, etc. So as I say, lectures, or a lecture, is basically a class that you're going to listen of a professor, a university professor commonly, discussing a scientific or academic topic. And as I say, in the TOEFL exam, you're going to listen to classes varying from a very, very wide spectrum of topics. As I say, biology, physics, mathematics, literature, architecture, and many other topics. Okay, the thing is that if you can conceive in your mind a topic that could be discussed and taught in a university, that is a likely topic you're going to receive as well here in this part of the exam, in the fourth question of the speaking section. So as I say, the first thing when you come to this part of the exam is that you're going to listen to a lecture. And by the way, this lecture is not going to be that long, don't worry. And here, let us discuss the timings, okay? So as you can see, the audio clip or the lecture you have to listen is going to last for approximately 2 minutes. You're going to listen to this professor of any academic discipline discussing a topic. As I say, if it is a biology professor, very likely he's going to be discussing Darwin's evolutionary theory or something like that, or I don't know, something like, let's say, natural selection or things of that sort. So apart from that, once you finalized listening to this lecture, that's all the material you're going to have to receive from ETS, okay? That's the only thing you're going to listen to. You don't have to read anything else. You don't have to read a reading passage, or you don't have to, I don't know, to write something. No, the only thing that happens is that when you enter in this question, they let you listen to this clip or to this lecture, as we have said, and it's going to last for 2 minutes. Once the lecture is over, you're going to have 20 seconds to prepare a response. And maybe you're wondering, what is the question at the end? Because I'm talking about a question, right? So what is the task? What do I have to do with this lecture and listening? And it's very simple, dear students. You have to summarize it, okay? Look at the picture I have here. I know it's familiar to many of you. And it's a journalist, right? And well, as you know, journalists primarily have to look for information into different sources. And they take all that information, they take notes on that information, and they prepare a summary to deliver to their audience. For example, if you're a journalist and you want to cover, let's say, the story of a famous singer, what would you do? You will go to different sources, right? You go, for example, to interview this singer's family and to ask them questions about his childhood or something. And then you would go to this famous singer's best friends or something. And you will ask them, hey, can you tell me an anecdote you have with this person? How is he in his personal life? Is his public character similar to the person he actually is in intimacy? What can you tell me about him, right? So you will make a lot of questions. and you collect information from different sources as a journalist. And then when you finalize doing that, you would take notes, of course, right? When you ask these questions to the family, to the best friends, and at the end, you would bring all that information and you would prepare a summary, right? Because that is what a journalist does. Journalists do not normally alter the information. They do not offer their opinion. They do not say, well, and I think that the best friend was very dishonest when talking to me, or the family exaggerated the details. No, I mean, a journalist doesn't do that. The journalist doesn't offer his or her opinion. The journalist manages to do a good job whenever he or she creates a summary conveying the information he received just as he received it. That is to say, without altering it, without changing it. And that's what you have to do, dear students. In this case, your information source is going to be this lecture. And the only thing you have to do is to prepare a summary of it. Okay, you have to summarize it, but as I say, respecting the information as it was presented to you. You shouldn't change it, you shouldn't alter it, and most importantly, you shouldn't offer your opinion, okay? For example, if they are discussing Darwin's evolutionary theory, you shouldn't say if the arguments that the professor postulated were convincing to you and say, okay, no, personally, I believe that Darwin's evolutionary theory is incorrect. You shouldn't say that. It's not a part of the exam to express your opinion. The only thing you have to do is to summarize it. You have to say, well, the professor said this about Darwin's evolutionary theory, and this data was discussed, and he also talked about this and that and that. Okay? And don't worry, because we have a template. I have a structure to share with you so that you know how to respond to this, and we have examples. Okay? So it's going to be very easy for you to understand this. All right? So, well, before you make your questions, I know you may have some of them, I want to tell you that you have 60 seconds in order to deliver that summary. Once you finalize with this 20 seconds of preparation that ETAs allows you to do, or allows you to have, excuse me, you have 1 minute in order to deliver that summary. You cannot speak as much as you want. You have to comprise all that information or summary you have prepared in 60 seconds. Okay, it's very important. Well, so as I said, before you make some questions, let me please show you some illustrations, okay? Because I know that, of course, we understand way better when we have illustrations, okay? So please let me show you that before we get into the questions time. Well, let me show you some examples, okay? So let us go here. So whenever you enter the fourth question of the speaking section, as I say, the first thing that happens is that ETS gives you the opportunity to listen a lecture, okay? And here we're going to listen a lecture together so that you know the complexity of these lectures. It's, as I say, a simulator, so the lecture you're going to listen to right now is very similar to the ones you're going to have on the exam. So listen to this very carefully, and as you do, please don't forget to take your notes, because as I say, notes are allowed during the entire exam. So in this case, please go and grab a piece of paper and a pencil and write down notes as you listen to this lecture, because as you know, you don't have a separate time for writing down your notes. You write down your notes as you listen to the lecture. At the same time you listen to this lecture. You cannot do it afterwards or something. You do it, as I say, while you listen. Okay, so please, while you listen, take your notes, because certainly you're not going to be able to remember everything in a perfect manner. So in order to prepare a summary, you need to have some sort of, I don't know, help or backup so that you can prepare your summary later on in the response. Okay, so please listen to this lecture. In this case, if Anna Rome is going to be about science, listen to it, and then I'm going to show you a response that I recorded myself, showing you how you should respond to this question. Okay, so listen to this lecture.
Now listen to part of a lecture from an economics class.
Today we're going to talk about a microeconomic concept referred to as opportunity cost. This concept speaks about the potential loss or gain from potential alternatives when one choice or course of action is taken over others. In its simplest form, the opportunity cost is the loss of the benefit that would have been enjoyed had a particular choice not been taken. This feeds back into the concept of scarcity that we discussed in the previous class. The idea that resources, such as time or money, are finite, and therefore choosing one thing often means not choosing something else. All of you guys are familiar with this concept. It applies to our daily lives as well. When we're selecting a movie to watch, say, the opportunity cost is whatever else we could have done during those 2 hours. As students, many of you could have used those 2 hours to do further study for your exams, say, or worked a couple of hours at a shop. You could even have watched another movie. I'm sure all of you have watched films before and thought, what a stinker. So, how does this relate to business? Well, businesses have 2 types of costs: explicit costs and implicit costs. Let's imagine, for instance, that a company needs to buy $200 of office supplies and sends one of its workers out to procure them. The explicit cost is the $200 for the office supplies. The implicit cost is the money the company paid the employee while he was performing that task. The company would have had to pay that employee whether he purchased those supplies or not, but he would have been doing an alternative task instead. Therefore, this activity has implicit costs of both time and money. What could the employee have achieved instead during the time he spent at Staples buying ink cartridges? Whatever that might have been is therefore the opportunity cost.
Great. So I hope you find this lecture to be very much understandable. It's, well, I would say the complexity you're also going to find on the exam. So you have to get used to it. And as I say, and as I always recommend to all of you, if you have some trouble understanding this type of material, the best manner you can improve is by going to YouTube and looking for lectures, free lectures on different topics. There are different, as I say, channels, especially the ones that are from the Ivy League universities in the US, Yale, Harvard, MIT, well, they present some of their classes in this platform, of course, on YouTube, and they allow people to listen to them, as I say, freely on YouTube. So if you want to listen to this type of material, get used to it, get familiarized with it, go and listen. Okay, it's just on YouTube, just look for it. The Yale classes or Yale lectures is going to appear there. Okay, anyways. Now, as I say, after you listen to this, ETS gives you 20 seconds to prepare a response, all right? So imagine that those 20 seconds have already happened, okay? And now listen to my response because I responded to this question. And remember, the question is simply summarize this lecture. There is no such a thing as summarize this bar or this particular segment. No, it's the entire lecture. So the question is always going to be summarize the lecture. So listen to my response. In this case, oh, sorry, it's not one, it's this one, okay? So listen to my response. And as you do this, you're going to be able to listen to the way I respond. And what I want you to notice, first of all, is that I'm not going to offer my opinion, okay? I'm not going to be including my opinion here, whether I dislike or like this type of financial or economic concept of, well, what the professor discussed in this opportunity. So you're going to realize how simply I summarize this lecture. And that is all you have to do as well, simply summarizing it. And of course, I'm following a little structure that I'm going to share with you afterwards. But for now, listen to this and notice, as I say, all these general details, that I'm not offering my opinion, and that the only thing I'm doing is to summarize the main ideas, of course, because a summary is the main ideas, right, of this lecture in 1 minute. Okay, so listen to my response.
In this lecture, we've been presented to the fascinating topic of opportunity cost, that is the value of every good when compared to what could have been done with the same good alternatively. Now, the professor gives an example of the real world when he says that if his students watch a 2 hour movie, what they could have done with the same amount of time would be their opportunity cost. They could have watched another movie or they could have done their assignments. Moving this into the business world, the professor says that companies have 2 types of costs, that is to say, the explicit ones and the implicit ones. If a company requires its employee to go and get a $300 supply, those $300 would be the explicit cost. But those $200 that the company may pay its employee to go and get them would be the implicit ones. And this would be also opportunity cost because they have to consider what that is a specific employee could have done for the same amount of money.
Great. Well, that's it. So notice that the only thing I did was to summarize the lecture, right? I offered a summary in 1 minute, and that's all. That's my response, actually. And that's the same you have to do every single time, okay? When you're in this question, it's always going to be the same. You listen to a lecture and then you prepare a summary in 20 seconds and you respond, okay? So before I show you another illustration, let me give you a very good glance, I would say, to how this question is going to look like on the exam, okay? So let me access my simulator here of the exam. And you're going to have, as I say, the chance to look at how this is going to appear on your screen whenever you take the exam. Of course, I'm assuming that you're going to take the IBT version or the home IBT version. But anyways, right, if you take the PBT version, at the end, you're going to have to listen to a lecture by any other means they offer you, right? But that's the reason why the paper-based test is so weird and rare nowadays. Well, when you go to the speaking section, task number 4, let me show you what is going to appear on your screen, okay? A very identical picture, I would say. So the first thing that happens is that when you're in the question number 4, you get a set of instructions. You don't need to read this. Well, at least it's not necessary because you know what to do, right? You simply listen to the lecture, you get 20 seconds to prepare a summary and 60 to deliver it. Well, you press next, all right? And here, as I say, is where you listen to this lecture. Now notice, as I say, that in this case, I can reproduce it.
Now,
notice that I reproduce the lecture and I can pause it and I can reproduce it again, etc., etc. This is not going to happen on the exam, all right, dear students. Notice that I can even, well, set it ahead or something, or to slow it down. I can do different things here. But this possibility is not available on the exam. On the exam, the computer reproduces this automatically. You don't get the chance to press like a play button or something. You cannot do so. The computer reproduces this lecture automatically and you listen to it once, okay? Sadly, if you don't manage to listen very well, or that is to say you don't understand, right? Because that's what we mean when we say I didn't listen. The only thing we mean is that we didn't understand. So if you didn't manage to understand it fully, sadly, you're not going to have the chance to listen to it twice. ETS merely allows you to listen to this once, all right? So you need to, as I say, be very much careful and efficient while taking your notes, because your notes are going to be the only resource you're going to have to remember what you listened and thus to prepare your summary, okay? So that's what I wanted to explain here. Well, the volume, of course, is adjustable. You can adjust it. Well, with that, there's no problem. But with regard to reproducing or skipping this, you cannot do it. The computer does that automatically. And as I say, you cannot repeat it. You cannot pause it or something. It always goes through straight away. And, well, it reproduces until the end, okay? Well, when you finalize listening to this lecture, or listening, excuse me, to this lecture, as you can see, in this case, it lasts for 2 minutes and 9 seconds. You are going to be moved to the next part. And this is the part where you actually respond, as I say. Look at it. Well, you have the question. The question is always the same. Use some points and examples from the talk. Explain the 2 types of biological selection. In this case, it was other lecture. So the point is that, as I say, don't even look at the question, because what the question asks out of you in summary is to deliver a summary. That is to say, although the question may say something different in the sense that it tells you, explain this concept or talk about this concept, the only thing that is actually requiring you to do is to deliver a summary. So trust me, okay? The manner to respond to this is always summarizing the entire lecture, okay? You don't have to focus on something particular. It doesn't work that way. I tell you this by experience. Every single time when I took the exam, I always delivered the summary, and that allowed me to have very good qualifications. So it's a matter of, as I say, listening very well, taking your notes, and then delivering a summary in 60 seconds, okay? Now let's go to another illustration before we move on to the structure that I want to share with you, for you to know how to organize and structure your summary, because of course, you need to have something already prepared so that on the exam, you don't go about improvising, but you have everything clear and organized in your mind, right? Well, let's go. So listen to another lecture. In this case, it's about another topic, of course. And then you're going to listen to my response to this one as well. Okay, listen.
Let's continue our discussion of animal adaptations by talking about special features that make it possible for certain fish to survive in the deepest part of the ocean, a place where almost no light reaches. Specifically, I'm going to talk about 2 very different features. All right, to start with, some deep sea fish have large tube-shaped eyes that always point upwards. One such species is known as the spookfish. These fish live thousands of meters below the surface of the ocean in almost total darkness. However, since their unique eyes point upward at all times, they have the ability to spot the faint outlines of fish swimming above them in parts of the ocean where a little light can reach. Once they spot such fish, they quickly swim upwards and eat them. I should also mention that their eyes are really huge, so they are able to detect even extremely tiny fish passing above. Next up is a type of fish that is able to create its own light. The lanternfish has a series of tiny organs throughout its body that give off light thanks to a chemical process called bioluminescence. Actually, this is the same chemical reaction that many different sea and land animals use to produce light. Anyways, the lanternfish can make itself bright enough to attract the attention of other fish in its surrounding area. If these fish are small enough, they become prey for the lanternfish. This makes it a very efficient hunter, despite the darkness of its natural environment. Interestingly, they can even use this special light to protect themselves from other organisms by matching the intensity of light coming from above. This makes it much harder for potential predators to spot them from below.
Okay, fantastic. So, well, in this case, as you managed to listen, the lecture was about biology, right? So, in this case, let us listen to my response. As I say, imagine that afterwards, they give us the opportunity to have 20 seconds. It's always that way. And by the way, as we have said, the way it works is that when you are here in this part, there is going to be a chronometer, okay, on your screen. Maybe you were wondering that when you start with the 20 seconds of preparation, there is a voice, okay, that you're going to listen, because in this part of the exam, as you know, of course, you're going to have your your headphones on, right? The headphones that have a microphone included for you to speak and to record your response. So in your headphones, you're going to listen to a voice that is going to be reading the question and saying, okay, now start preparing your response after the beep. And there's going to be a sound like beep. And when you listen to that sound like beep, there's going to be a chronometer here on your screen going backwards. That is to say 20, 19, 18, 17, 16, 15, 14. And thus you're going to be able to calculate and measure by yourself how much remaining time you have for completing your summary. As I say, they give you 20 seconds for preparing it, taking your papers, reading, etc. Right? And then after those 20 seconds are over, once again, the voice in your headphones is going to speak and say, well, now that you have prepared your summary, begin delivering it after the beep. And once again, a sound like beep. And when you listen to that, another chronometer is going to appear on your screen, having 60 seconds in this case, and going backwards once again. 60, 59, 58, 57, 56, 55, until 0, right? And well, as I say, always frame your responses within the time they give you. If they give you 60 seconds, it's because of a reason. That is to say, if you speak more than that, it's not going to be recorded, because as you know, dear students, the speaking section is one of the parts in the TOEFL exam where your responses are not analyzed by artificial intelligence or something like that. Because in the reading section and the listening section, your responses are analyzed by artificial intelligence and of course, assistants they have designed for checking out if your responses are correct, etc. But the speaking section is analyzed and reviewed by a professional. They have their own staff, English professors, etc., who review this, that is to say, listen to your response that is recorded here, and they give you a punctuation or a score depending on your performance, all right? So notice that you need to make sure to frame your response in the 60 seconds so that your reviewer notices you are able to have that type of capacity, okay? So please always frame your responses within the 60 seconds. Now listen to my response, and then I'm going to be able to listen to your questions before I offer you the template, okay? So listen to my response to this one, and then I'm gonna give you space for making questions.
In this lecture, we've been presented to the fascinating topic of features helping fishes to survive deep in the ocean's darkness. The professor mentions there is one fish called the spookfish that by having eyes always looking upwards can perceive some prey above in the only perceivable strokes of light and then to hunt them. Furthermore, the professor mentions that the lanternfishes that have bioluminescence can produce such an effect through internal organs. They are able, by this specific phenomena, to attract some prey, and when they are confused, they hunt them. They also can protect themselves by the same mechanism by matching the brightness of the environment and thus confusing those predators that are trying to hunt them.
Beautiful. There you are. So as I say, this is it, my response, right? And now, as you noticed, I was following a pattern, let's say, in how I summarized the lecture. But before I show you that, I want to listen to your questions. Do you have any question to this point, something that I could clarify with regard to what you have to do in this question or with regard to the concept we have discussed? Any question? Dear students, I give you space here. Questions? Blah, Karen, Jasmine, Maya, Lucia, Daniela, Karen, Lenny.
No, teacher, everything is clear.
Okay, thank you very much. Great, guys. What about the rest of you? Any questions?
Teacher, I have a question. When we start to talk, you can give us an advice, or we need to start, for example, in the other parts of the speaking section, you gave us some different advice. So how can we start and finish, or in the middle of the speaking?
Yes, certainly. And that is exactly what I want to do right now. So look at my screen. And so notice this. So here I have the template or the structure that you can utilize for summarizing your lecture, okay? If you notice, this is actually how I summarize it. I had some phrases that I always repeated in both of my responses, and you can practice this, take a picture of this slide or write it down in your notes. And thus you can repeat this, well, apply it in your responses. And as I say, have everything organized before you take the exam. So notice that my structure here or template for you consists of 4 different steps. In this first step, we have an introductory phrase that if you listen carefully, I repeat it in both of my responses because I was using this structure. The introductory phrase is, in this lecture, we've been presented to the fascinating topic of, so that is what I always said, right? Beginning my responses, starting them. This was my introductory phrase, what I used in order to introduce my response. So in this lecture, we've been presented to the fascinating topic of, and here's where you mention what was the main idea or the title of your lecture, right? Because certainly in every single lecture, there is a main idea, there is a main topic. So notice how this sentence is somehow directing you to mention that central idea or main idea, right? For example, in the responses I gave, I said, right, in this lecture, we've been presented to the fascinating topic of characteristics or features helping fish to survive in the darkness ocean, or excuse me, in the ocean's darkness, right? Or in the other case, in the first response, in this lecture, we've been presented to the fascinating topic of, I was named, it was opportunity costs, right? So in this lecture, we've been presented to the fascinating topic of opportunity costs. Or on the other hand, in this lecture, we've been presented to the fascinating topic of features helping fishes to survive in the ocean's darkness. So obviously, the main idea or title of your lecture is going to change depending on what topic or lecture you receive. And as I always tell you, the idea is that ETS constantly creates more material. That is to say, these topics that you're practicing with me, the one about opportunity costs and the one about these features on fishes, are not going to be repeated, okay? You're not going to find them on the actual exam. On the actual exam, you're going to receive a completely new topic and that not even me is going to know, or not even other people who take the exam, let's say 2 weeks after you or two weeks before you are going to receive. But the questions and the lectures and the topics you receive are, as I say, especially created for you, okay? And for your date and for the test center you have attended to, all right? So notice that. Well, Once you finalize this first introductory phrase and you mention the main idea of your lecture, you start with a summary. And you know that a summary, as we have pointed out, is basically consisting of the main ideas mentioned in the lecture. And that is the basic concept actually of a summary, right? When we are in high school or starting the university, they teach us that whenever we want to create a summary, the only thing we have to do is to include the main ideas of such material, article, or text we are going to summarize. And then, of course, to include some important details. But the most important part is to include the most relevant and important ideas of such material. And that's what a summary is. So how did I structure my summary? By mentioning the first lecture's point and the illustration the professor gave, but the second lecture's point and the illustration the professor gave, and if there is such, a third lecture's point and an illustration. Notice that that is how the professor organizes his lecture. He says something, he says a topic, or excuse me, he discusses an idea, and then he proposes an illustration, right? For example, when the professor talked about opportunity costs, what he did was to, first of all, define what opportunity costs were. He said, right, opportunity costs is or are whatever you can do alternatively with any type of resource you get. And then he said, right, for example, when you go to a study at the university, what you could be doing, what you could be doing instead of taking classes at that institution, as for example, working at the cafeteria or watching a movie for 5 or 4 hours, is the opportunity cost, because it represents what you could be alternatively doing at the same time and with the same resources. Okay, so notice how the professor talked about a point and then offered an illustration, and that is what you have to include. And then the professor moved to a second point. He said, moreover, under this concept of opportunity cost, there are two different ideas underlying the term. And he talked about these two other financial things that were the intrinsic and extrinsic costs, right? He said, whenever you are, for example, hiring somebody. So notice that was the second point, right? The second point was the professor said, there are two different ideas you also need to comprehend here, intrinsic and extrinsic costs. And he said, an intrinsic cost is, for example, so notice that he gave the idea and he moved to an illustration. For example, when you're hiring somebody to work for you, the salary you have assigned to that person is going to be the direct or intrinsic cost you have for that person. And then he talked about a third point. He said, but when you're talking about an extrinsic cost, what you're actually talking about is that amount of money or resources you are externally applying with the same person. And he said, right, as an illustration, if you ask your employee to go and buy for you a product, if that product costs, let's say $300, those $300 are going to be the extrinsic costs you have, because you are not paying that to the employee, but you're giving him that money in order to attain or get those products for you, right? So notice how the professor said all those different ideas and illustrations. And trust me, as we practice this tomorrow, because tomorrow we're going to practice this together, you're going to notice how professors always organize their lectures this manner. They offer a point or an idea, and then they move on to an illustration. It was exactly the same in the second lecture, right? The professor said, well, we're going to discuss some characteristics helping fish to survive deep in the ocean's darkness. And he said, well, first of all, there are some fishes that have special organs that help them to survive in this environment. And he said, right, as an illustration, we have the land fishes, how they have this these organs within their bodies that manage to create bioluminescence, right? And he said, well, this fish managed to create bioluminescence, how was it? Bioluminescence, right? No, or bioluminescence. No, bioluminescence. It was a very weird word. I always struggle by pronouncing it, but it was bioluminescence, I think. But the thing is, the professor said, this fish manages to create this light within its body by activating these organs and this bioluminescence, that's it, bioluminescence process, and how they manage to attract some prey by this mechanism and then to hunt them, right? So notice how the professor gave us a particular idea, how some fishes do have an organ or internal mechanism for attracting prey, and then gave the example of the landfish and how he creates this light by bioluminescence and how he attracts his prey and hunt them, right? So that's the idea. And then he also talked about another point, if I'm not wrong. He talked about how some fish have some sort of organs that manage to reach extreme positions. And he talked about the spook fish, if I'm not wrong, right? You remember more than me because you do your notes. And he talked about how this spook fish manages to move its eyes very upward, right? And by doing so, he manages to perceive some prey going through these very unperceivable strokes of light. And whenever he perceives one and manages to visualize one of them, he goes up and hunts them, right? So notice how the professor once again gave an idea of some fishes that manage to have extreme organs reaching extreme positions and gave the example of the spookfish, right? So trust me, it's always organized that way. So following that is also going to be your response. You mentioned the introductory phrase, you refer to your main idea, and then you go about mentioning the first point by the professor, that is to say the first point that the professor made, the illustration he offered, then you move on to the second point the professor made, the illustration he offered, and finally, you go with the third point, if there is one, because sometimes dear students, you're gonna find, I would say, more likely or more naturally, that lectures merely contain two main ideas. And that's fantastic, because if you find two main ideas, you really have to care about them. But if you find out that in your lecture, the professor talks about three different main ideas and gives three different illustrations, please include them within their response. Or if the professor, for example, in a very unlikely, but anyways possible case, delivers four different ideas or points within the lecture and offers four illustrations, include them all within your response. The concept is there. Talk about the lecture's point and the illustration that accompanies it. Don't leave out this information, that is to say, always include the illustration, because trust me, I would say that the reviewers pay more attention to how you summarize the illustrations than the points, because points are very easy to summarize. So they have to say, well, opportunity costs are that amount of resources you get to alternative purposes. That's very easy to summarize and very easy to say. But when you have to talk about the illustrations, your mind needs to have more complexity while organizing these ideas. So trust me, you want to pay more attention to the illustrations even, and not to the points. So always spend more time talking about the illustrations. Briefly summarize the points, the ideas, but as I say, spend more time talking about the illustrations and how the professor used this illustration to make the topic clearer to his or her student, okay? That's what you have to do. Is there any question with regard to this template we have just discussed? Anything that I could clarify? Please tell me.
Yeah,
Questions
teacher,
here?
for the first point, do we have to do like the summarize like in the previous exercise or tasks to do in about 10 seconds, the summarize general to distribute efficiently or time?
Yeah, you can do it that way. That is to say, for example, you could say, right, in this lecture, we've been presented to the fascinating topic of opportunity costs that represent that amount of resources you can alternatively apply to different activities, right? And then you say, moreover, the professor talked about this, right? And you say the first point and then illustration, then the second point, furthermore, or secondly, he said this, and you talked about the second point. You can do it that way, or you can alternatively jump directly into the points. You could say, in this lecture, we've been presented to the fascinating topic of opportunity costs. First, the professor said that, right? And you continue and you move on to illustration, to the second illustration, second topic, second idea, as you prefer. Here, I would say that you are very much flexible, and the structure itself is very flexible. So determine it by yourself. Look at your comfort and look at your ability to do this, as I say, framing the response within the 60 seconds, because at the end, what you do not want to get is a response that is incomplete. You want to get it complete, and you want to offer a response that sounds connected, sounds natural, but as I say, it's framed within the 60 seconds. Yeah, but you can do it that way, whether any of those alternatives work. Okay, any other question, guys? Any other thing here?
Yes, teacher. when we are recording the response, we can look our notes?
Yes, certainly you can. As I say, you get a chance, right, to, for example, let me give you here an illustration. So let's say this is your sheet of paper, right? So notice that here I always recommend you, as we have discussed, I always recommend you to mark some points, right? Always emphasizing where you're starting your notes and when you're finalizing, right? So let's say you make this rows of different points, and then you have your notes very clear. So let's say that on the other side of the paper or on the other page, you could simply start and copy this, right? I always recommend actually to copy this structure within your paper, that is to say on your paper. So the first thing you do when you receive your paper is to, of course, you have memorized this, right? So I always recommend to dear students to memorize these structures, because you cannot enter your computation room or you cannot take the exam by having your external notes, that is to say, things to prepare before the exam. You can take notes as you listen to the exam and as you do the exam, but let's say the notes you took 2 weeks ago or 2 weeks before you take the exam are not possibly accepted within the exam. So you have to memorize these things. You cannot, for example, have your cell phone and copy them on the exam. You have to, as I say, memorize this. So whenever you have this memorized, the first thing you do is you take your blank sheet of paper, right? And you copy that structure on the paper. And thus, when you're listening, you know more or less what points or ideas you're going to be discussing, right? So you can follow that technique, actually, as I said. You can just take this and you have it memorized and you copy it on your paper. But yeah, responding to the question, you can certainly look at your paper. And actually something that I used to do when I was taking the exam was that when I had my paper, right, and I had everything prepared, because as I say, you get 20 seconds, right? You have 20 seconds for preparing your response and organizing what you're going to include, what you're not going to include, because remember, you cannot include everything. It's just 1 minute. So you have to, of course, dispense with some information. Things that are simply details or irrelevant information should definitely be left out of the summary. So the idea is that whenever you have decided what you're going to include in your summary and you have everything prepared, take your sheet of paper this way, as if you were facing it, like take it this way, right? And actually you can, as I say, read the paper and have it very much in front of you so that you do not get concentrated, because sometimes it happens to us that when we are speaking and as we have different things moving around us, right? We get concentrated because we look at something specifically, and that something could be, I don't know, a moving object or a person going through the corridors or something, and that could be disruptive. So if you take your sheet of paper and you look at it right in front of you, nothing is going to be in your visual range, right? So if you look at the paper, as I say, it's going to be totally legal, first of all, and it's going to be advantageous, I would say as well. Okay, so try to do that. When you have everything prepared, lift up your paper, put it in front of your eyes, and look at it and read it if you want to during the entire response. Of course, you cannot write everything you're going to respond, but if you read the points at least, you're going to know what to say, right? That's another strategy that I recommend you for this part of the exam. Great. Any other question, dear student? Concerns, doubts about this, clarifications? Please tell me. No questions? Okay, great. So if you don't have more questions, here we're going to finalize. Okay, we're going to finalize our class tonight. And as I say, tomorrow, we're going to be discussing, or excuse me, practicing for this. The entire class is going to be for you to practice. One by one, you're going to have a chance to deliver your summaries. We're going to listen to several lectures, and then you're going to have a chance to respond in 1 minute, and of course, having the 20 seconds previous to that response. I'm going to have the chronometer ready, and I'm going to have as well, of course, my 60 seconds ready too. Everything is going to be on my screen, and you're going to be able to feel and experience how you're actually going to perform on the exam. Okay, so please don't miss tomorrow's class. It's very important because we're going to apply what we learned today. And of course, many concerns and doubts are going to be elevated at that time, because when we practice is when we see our difficulties, right? So please don't miss tomorrow's class. It's going to be very important. Okay, so great. If you don't have more questions, then we're going to finalize here. And well, as I say, before you go, please accompany me so that I take your assistance. And as you do so, please help me with your kind responses to this traditional poll, okay, that we always feel with regard to the class, okay? And if you have any other commentary or question, please don't let yourself to be discouraged to say it, okay? Okay, so listen to your names, please, and say present, all right? So here we have, first of all, we have Lucia Sulema.
Here, teacher.
Thank you very much, Lucia. What about Karen Ginelli?
Present, teacher.
Thank you very much, Karen. What about Flavia Montaño?
Present, teacher.
Thank you very much. What about Mariel Lopez?
Present, teacher.
Thank you very much, Mariel. What about Yvonne Cana? Okay. What about Lenny Jimenez?
Present, teacher.
Thank you very much, Lenny. And Richard Fernando. What about Karen Silvana?
Present, teacher.
Thank you very much, Karen. What about Daniela Crespo?
Present, teacher.
Thank you very much, Daniela. What about Diane Romino? Okay, and finally, Jasmine Camila.
Present, teacher.
Thank you very much, Jasmine. Great, thank you very much, guys, for your kind responses. I see you tomorrow then in order to practice with me. And please, as I say, make sure to prepare your microphone and to have a good pair of headphones so you can listen to the lecture appropriately. Okay, have a wonderful night and I see you tomorrow.
Teacher, sorry. Are we gonna have the calls? The administration could reschedule that, or how can we are going to?
Oh yeah, you can reserve for this Monday. Sadly, they were not able to enable another date for this week, but it's sadly going to be, as I say, next Monday if you want to have the sessions. But yeah, you're gonna have the chance to have them, but next Monday, because
Okay.
this
because yesterday we didn't have classes, right? Because the recess. Okay.
Yes, exactly.
Okay. Thank you, teacher.
My pleasure, Lucia. Thank you very much to you. Great. I see there's somebody here in the chat. Karen, you have a question? Tell me. Did you pass the slideshows to the group? Well, yeah, of course, I'm gonna do it. Okay, I'm gonna do it. Don't worry. But yeah, I'm gonna be doing so. Okay, great, guys. So if you don't have any other question or commentary, I wish you a fantastic night and see you tomorrow. Okay, thank you very much.
Teacher. Bye, teacher. Thank you.
Bye bye. Thank you very much. See you.